welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival. I am Quinn Boyd-Roberts, a 13-year-old from Oakland, California, and I am honored to be moderating this panel. I'm so excited to be here with authors Mae Respicio and Scott Ostler to talk about what the true meaning of winning is, and which is very well captured in each of their books. Hello, Mae and Scott. I'd like to start by telling our viewers a little bit about each of you. Scott is a very popular sports columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. He has been voted California Sports Writer of the Year 14 times. He has covered major sports all over the world and has been published in national publications like Sports Illustrated, which is one of my personal favorites. Scott is the author of 5 nonfiction books for adults. Bouncing Back, which I have right here, actually. Bouncing Back is his debut novel. Mae is a beloved teller of stories told from the point of view of middle graders like myself. Her writing and photography has been published in places like Pottery Barn Kids and Red Tricycle. Her first book, The House That Lou Built, is one of my personal favorites and has won quite a few awards, including being named an NPR Best Book. Her latest book, Any Day With You, which I also have conveniently right here, her latest book, Any Day With You, was released last month and is going to be another big hit. I got to interview Mae at last year's book festival, and I'm ecstatic to be able to interview her again. So I just wanted to start this off and just simple question, ask each of you, how are each of you doing in these times? Scott, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, first of all, Quinn, thanks very much for doing this. It's really cool, and I know you're right in the middle of schoolwork and stuff like that, so thanks for taking the time out to have us on. We really appreciate it. And you're asking me how I'm doing? I'm doing great. This is the first day in about 2 months I've worn an actual shirt. You know, usually it's a t-shirt or something like that. So I got really dressed up for this, but I'm doing fine. I feel a little guilty that I'm doing so fine because I know a lot of people are struggling, both with health things and other issues. So I'm aware of the stuff going on. A friend of mine just said recently, he said, yeah, it's like being under house arrest, like being in prison, but I live in a very nice prison. So I'm fortunate that I have a nice jail that I'm locked up into. So I'm lucky. Thank you.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm glad you're doing so well. And Mae, how about you?
Well, just quickly wanted to thank you both for being here. And I was so looking forward to talking to you both today. So I think my honest answer is that I'm kind of up and down. You know, these are just strange, challenging times that we're living in, or history that we're living through. So, but right now is definitely an up day and an up moment. Just I'm so excited to talk to you about books and reading, and I think those are 2 of the things that are really getting me through these times. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and reading has been a big part. So transitioning to my next question, sheltering in place for the past few months has really opened my eyes to the world around me in a very different way than any time before. So I was wondering, if you were writing your books now under these circumstances of stay at home, don't really go anywhere, those kind of circumstances, how would anything differ in the process of your writing? And how is this situation affecting other writings that you might be working on right now? Let's have Mae start, and then we can go to Scott.
Sure. Well, that's a great question, Quinn. I think for me, the process of writing is always the same when I'm writing books. And for me, there's kind of 2 big parts. I've got the very joyful part where I've come up with this shiny new idea and I just want to go, 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 go. And then that dissipates a little bit at some point, because then there's a piece where, okay, well, now I have to actually revise this thing and edit it and, you know, actually put in the work to make it a book that people will want to read, or a book that I would want to read. And so I'm actually working on my next book right now. And so I've been having to do this while we're sheltering in place. And it's not easy, I'd say, just because, you know, there's so much going on right now in the world, and a lot of that is taking up headspace. But, you know, with my writing, I find that I just have to show up every day and get through it and look at what I've written and just be there with my computer or with my notepad. Otherwise, I would never get anything done. So, but I think logistically, the thing that's different for me is I used to have a chunk of my time in the day to write, when my kids were at school. But now it's sort of a free-for-all in my household. Everyone's here on top of each other. So I am actually waking up a lot earlier than I used to just get some quiet thinking time in. But I do think it's important, at least for my process, is no matter what is going on around me or what the context is, I try to show up every day and just get a few words onto the page.
That's good. And by the way, this is my first book, as you mentioned, Quinn. And so I'm anxious to hear what Mae has to say about a lot of this stuff, because I'm going to learn from her. She's done some books. She's got the experience. And what you just said there is important. I think it's an important lesson for a lot of writers, is that discipline. I've struggled with that. Just have, get down to it, have a regular time or whatever, rather than putting everything off. So in that respect, though, the shutdown has been kind of easier for me. It's made writing a little bit easier for me. If I was writing a book right now, it would be easier. I'm not working on one right now. Normally, I'm a sports writer, so normally I'd be going out to ball games, not every night, but 2 or 3 nights a week. I'd be going out and doing interviews, and I don't have that. It's fun, but it takes a lot of time. So now I basically have more time, and if I can just get more discipline, like Mae said, get more locked into a regular schedule, then I can become even more productive. But it's been fine. I've not struggled at all with the close shutdown.
Yeah, time is so valuable. And I don't know about you, but I'm really missing sports a lot, and specifically baseball. But yeah, that's really, really, really tough. So now to the theme of each of your books. What prompted you to both write about winning? I know they're not both just about winning, like they're both about overcoming stuff and family, which are very important things. But at the heart of it, there's a lot of winning involved. So I'm wondering what prompted you. We can have Scott go first, and then we can have Mae.
Yeah, I'm not sure I set out specifically just to write about winning, but it just occurs to me that almost every fiction book is about winning in some ways. Even, let's say, a detective thriller, it's about the detective winning. It's about the good guys beating the bad guys. It's about somebody winning. And kind of every book, not only sports, is like that. And so I guess it just fell into place that way, And sure, it's about winning. And oddly enough, my book went through a few versions and revisions and everything with the help of some really good editors and some guidance. But my first version kind of ended abruptly, and it ended. My book is about a wheelchair basketball team, and the book ended with them kind of winning, but we didn't know what was going to happen. And my editor came back to me and says, "No, we have to know. We have to know that they win. We have to carry it further." So it became even more about winning. But like I said, I think winning is just about almost every, Moby Dick. Somebody wins that book. Every book, somebody wins.
And yeah, I would agree with what Scott said. I do think, books all have this theme of winning. There's a character and they want something, and you're going on this journey with them to see if they're actually going to get what it is that they want. So this book that just came out, Any Day With You, is all about a 12-year-old girl named Kaia. And at the heart of the book is her grandpa is deciding to move back to his homeland of the Philippines, and she does not want him to go. She does not want him to say goodbye. So the book, I started off with that theme of this really emotional thing that this girl wants. She doesn't want her grandfather to say goodbye. And so then that's when I started thinking about the piece of winning. So I had to think about the storyline and what challenges could I put in her way to give something at stake to the story so that it would be interesting as you're reading about her journey. So, Kaia is a kid who, she loves making movies. She's super creative. She loves doing special effects makeup. And so somehow I kind of threw all those things together, and I thought, oh, okay, there's a film contest in this, and let's put in this contest. And she thinks that this contest is the way that's going, if she wins it, that she's going to stop her grandfather from saying goodbye. So I think, like Scott, I didn't really start off with the idea of winning, but as I sort of drilled down and tried to think about who this girl is, and sort of what she's going through in her life, what gives her different emotional challenges, that's how I came up with the idea of this contest.
Wow, I never really thought about it that way, but that's I know that winning isn't like there's winning in everything, but yeah, wow, that's good to know. That's good to know. Okay. So May, I have a few questions for you, and then Scott, and then we'll go back and forth, just like that. So Tatong, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Close. It's Tatang. So the emphasis is on the first syllable. Tatang.
Tatang. Okay. Okay. Good. I just want to make sure that that's right. Okay. So Tatang, Kaia's great grandfather, like you just mentioned earlier, is a huge influence on her life. So I'm wondering, did you have anyone like Tatang in your life that inspired you to create this character, or that just inspired you in general?
I did. I didn't ever know my great-grandparents. They had already passed by the time that I was born, but I did have a close relationship growing up with all four of my grandparents. I was lucky to have that in my life for a long time. They lived close by. Both of my parents were working parents, so I never had a babysitter. If they needed me to be with someone, I would be with my grandparents. So I definitely was influenced by them and by their love and all of those wonderful things. But they were nothing like Tatang's character. The great-grandfather is this sort of eccentric guy who he loves going on roller coasters, and he surfs and all these things that my grandparents didn't do. But what is sort of similar, and what gave me some inspiration to this story, is that he loves to tell stories. And the Filipino culture is one that is big on oral storytelling. So I have these wonderful memories of growing up and going to holiday parties of my extended family, and all my cousins and I would sit and we would gather and we would listen to some of the grandparents or aunts and uncles tell us stories, and they would tell us about their life growing up in a different country. They would tell us their stories of their first moments coming to this country. They would tell us ghost stories, like all kinds of things, folk tales, folklore. And so I was able to use that in his character because he is a guy who loves telling stories. So I was lucky to have that in my life, to really have my family's history and their stories very deeply rooted within me. And that definitely inspired this book.
Yeah, I relate so much when your grandparents tell you stories. My grandfather, when I was little, he would tell me so many stories. Some of them I don't even know were true. I don't even know if they were true. But he would he always had something to say, and it would always start with, Quinn, 20 or 30 years ago, and he would never know exactly when they took place, but he would say, a little while ago, or 20 to 30 years ago. And so it just, I know what you mean when they keep, when they tell us so many stories. So Kaia has an older sister, named Lainey, who overshadows her quite a bit. And so I'm curious if you experienced anything like that. I know Lainey doesn't really mean to, but it happens, and Kaia feels very less than Lainey. And so I wondered if anyone, if you experienced that yourself, or if you witnessed it in your household growing up, or ever.
Yeah, that's a great question, Quinn. I didn't have any older siblings growing up, so I didn't quite have that relationship that Lainey and Kaia do. But I think what I do have that Kaia goes through, and I think maybe everyone experiences this at some point in their lives as kids or even as adults, is the real need to make her mark and to feel like she is doing something that she's good at and to stand out. I see that in my own kids. They're probably around your age, Quinn. They're close to your age, and I think kids really want to do things to feel good about themselves and their communities and to stand out. And so that's something that I really looked at. But the overshadowing by an older sibling is nothing that I actually experienced myself. But I see it a little bit though with my kids.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you didn't get overshadowed. Overshadowed is it's not a good thing. It's not very fun. Okay, so transitioning to Scott now. So you are such a well-known columnist for one of the biggest newspapers in the country, and your readers are mostly adults. So I'm wondering what made you want to write a book about a kid for kids my age specifically?
Well, for one thing, Quinn, if you could see some of the emails and so forth I get, you wouldn't be so convinced that all my readers are adults. Some of them are below kids, but it's very complicated. I think what caused me to write a kid's book, a young adult book, is I had about 4 or 5 ideas for books, various fiction books. I've written I've written some nonfiction books, but I've always had this idea. I'd like to do fiction. Everybody does. Everybody, has those ideas. But so I had 4 or 5 ideas, and I happened to do a couple stories, become aware, and do a couple stories with a wheelchair basketball team in Berkeley, not too far from where I live, and it was really fascinating to me. It was a kind of different world. I was not used to doing that kind of stuff about disabled people and kids in wheelchairs and stuff. And it was fascinating. It just opened my eyes up to that new world. And I came home one day and I was very enthusiastic. And I was telling my wife how great it was how much fun the game was, and what great fun these kids have, and how their spirit and their competition and all this stuff. And my wife said, you've been talking about writing a kid's book, among other things. Why don't you write a book about a wheelchair basketball team? Because everybody writes kids' sports books, but nobody writes about disabled kids. I thought, that's a great idea, and it just hit home. And it also seemed like a way of making the story different and in some ways more exciting and everything. So it just made sense, and so that's why I decided to do it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the book, and I thought it was great how you brought awareness to how disabled kids can play basketball too, and just as well. So when I was first starting to learn to read and write, I was not interested in books very much, as like the way I am now. But the way I learned to read was actually reading the backs of baseball cards and the San Francisco Chronicle sporting green. I honestly couldn't get enough of either of them. Every Sunday, I would run out to my front porch, grab the paper, tear off the first cover, because usually when I got the paper, the sporting green was almost never on the cover. It was the second one. Tore off the first cover and went right into the sporting green. So what jump-started your love of reading and writing?
Wow, that goes deep. I'm kind of convinced that there's a gene for reading, for liking to read, appreciating to read, because my parents were both, they're reasonably upright people, and they did some reading and everything, but neither one of them graduated. Neither one of them even went to college. They graduated high school. They weren't super big readers. They never sat me down and said, you got to read this, or you got to learn to read and write early and all that stuff. It was just, okay, if you want to read, fine, we'll help you get books. But I remember my mom took me to the library, my sister and I, when I was probably, 6, however old you are when you start learning to read, basically in school, 5 or 6. And I'd never been to a library, and I went to a library, and it was like walking into a candy store. And thought, wow, this is pretty cool. This is all these books. You can read all these, and I just love books. I love the smell of the books, just like feeling them. It's great to hold a book. Oh, this is a cool book. It's just the title. And, oh my God, I got to read this book. It sounds like such a great book. So I don't know. I love to read, and once you start reading it, I remember. I'll just quickly the first non-picture book I read, above the sort of the Dick and Jane See Spot Run kind of book. It was a book about Dr. Dolittle. I've seen the movies and stuff, but when I first picked it up, it seemed like it was like a 500-page book. Oh my God, all these words. It was probably 150 pages, but it was this doctor who could talk to animals, and that just blew me away. I thought that was so cool, and I just love books. Even now, I can't go by a bookstore without wanting to go in and just dive into every book there.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, Mae, this I want to ask you the same question. What jump-started your love of reading and writing, and how did you start?
Yeah, I'm just someone who has always loved books and always has loved words. And when I was a kid, I was a total bookworm. I always had my face in a book. And I think it was around 3rd or 4th grade, I joined our creative writing club at my elementary school. And that's how I started writing stories. But I'm just always one of those people who has always wanted to write and to work with words. And I do the same thing, Scott. The first thing I did when I got this book, my copy, was I opened it and I smelled it.
Yeah, books just right off the rip, they smell so good, and they're so comforting, honestly, to just sit down and grab a cup of cocoa and just read.
Yeah. And Quinn, you mentioned what got started in reading and writing. Just quickly, one of the things that got pushed me along in writing, I think, was that in middle school, 5th, 6th grade or whatever, sports is big, right? And so if you're one of the really good athletes in school, you have status. You're important. People look up to you, right? Well, I wasn't a great athlete. I wasn't totally bad, but I was kind of super mediocre. And so I didn't get any strokes that way. I didn't get any, oh my God, look at him. He's a great athlete. But occasionally the teacher would have us write essays, right? He or she would put up a magazine cover and say, write a story about this. Make this into a story. And I would do it, and I'd always try to write something funny. And then the teacher would pick out 3 or 4 of the ones that people wrote to read to the class. And a lot of times he or she would pick out my story, and she'd read it, and the class would laugh. that was my, I was not a superstar athlete, but all of a sudden people are laughing at me and thinking I'm funny and thinking I'm cool. So that kind of gave me a lot of push, I think.
Yeah, laughter is a really important thing. So back to you, Kaia has some really special friends in Abby and Trey. So I'm curious about your friendships growing up and whether either of these characters were based off of people in your own life.
I didn't base Abby and Trey off of anyone specific that I knew or that I've known in my life. I had lots of different kinds of friends, I think, growing up, but so Abby is this real take charge girl. She's got this big voice. People listen to her. And then Trey is this kid who wants to be an actor, and he's kind of goofy and funny, and he's just sort of go with the flow. And I love them so much. They're such creative kids with these huge passions for making things. And those were always the kinds of kids I think I was drawn to when I was growing up. I remembered when I was in elementary school, my best friend and I used to write these little plays, and she wanted to be a performer. And so I would write these plays, and then she would perform them, or we'd gather kids, during recess and make them perform the play that I wrote. And then actually my friend went on to become a performer. She was a dancer in New York. So I love kids who have a passion for making things and for bringing their ideas to life. And I sort of see that in my own boys as well. But I never actually write about anyone specific that I know. I tend to draw a lot of characteristics and qualities from people I know in real life. But I think that's the fun of writing fiction, is just coming up with this whole new character that you've never met and that you don't actually know in real life.
Yeah, it's always exciting to, kind of meet someone new without it actually being a person. It's very, very cool. And that's interesting that you don't take, it's characteristics, that you don't take actual people. That's kind of surprising, actually. I don't know. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's good to know. I'm glad. So Kaia learned that winning isn't as much about the filmmaking contest than it is about family. So how can we keep family together after shelter in place ends, when kids just want to be with their friends all the time?
That is a great and tough question. I don't know. I think it's going to be really, like I see it in my own kids. They miss their friends so, so much. I'm sure like you do, because you're not seeing them on a regular basis. But you know what's, there have been really joyful moments with the whole shelter in place, at least for my family, where we've been creating these little traditions. We used to hike and take bike rides a lot, but that's something that we do pretty much almost every day around the same time. We've got a couple of trails near us, near our house, and we do that every night just as a family. And, I know a lot of families are sheltering in place and they're doing puzzles, or they're reading aloud, or they're baking and cooking together. So I feel like as much as you can keep those little good parts about shelter in place and bring them forward, once we're back to our new normal, I think that's a way to keep families together. But I do know that kids really miss their friends right now. And I miss my friends right now too. And I miss hugging people.
Yeah, I really miss my friends a whole lot.
Yeah.
So Scott, transferring, going back to you again, the main character Carlos has to get past his own kind of ideas about winning to be all in for the team. So how do you get inside the character's head like that and write about a transformation like Carlos had?
Just open up a little hatch in Carlos's head, and I just jump right in. I'm not sure. It was all new to me, and so I just put myself in his feet, in his shoes, and if I was in that spot when I was 12 or 13 years old, what would I do? What mistakes would I make? How would I go about it? And so I don't know. I've never done it before, so I figured that's what you do. You invent a character, somebody, in this case, somebody you kind of like and have some empathy for and everything, and then you just tell his or her story. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No.
Okay. And Mae, I'm curious how you get in the character's head and kind of explain their thought process to the reader, because I've always been kind of curious, as I like writing myself. How do you get inside a character's head like both of you have done?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a little bit of what Scott does as well. I spend a lot of time on the page just testing things out. I spend a lot of thinking time as well before I actually go to the page to write. I think about a character and what she wants in the world, what her personality is like. I try to come up with little details about her home life, and even just the little details about what she looks like visually. And I sort of brainstorm those. I do a lot of those word clouds, and then I let that sit and I think about, well, who is my character and what kinds of choices am I going to have her make? And then I just start writing. And sometimes for me, I have to write a chapter or a scene a couple of different times in a few different ways until I really capture what I'm looking for in a character. And so, yeah, I know that's not like the most straightforward answer, but for me, it's just trying to spend some time in the character's head. And I do that by just brainstorming and by trying out different things. I might have my character in a certain scene. Like, for example, they go to the beach a lot in this book. So there was one beach scene where I had Kaia there with her family. And I wrote it just a few different ways to just see how it felt to me and to get a sense of how she acts in this world. And so I do a lot of that in the beginning in my drafting stage, as I'm trying to figure them out.
Yeah,
but, it's hard. It's sometimes your process is different too from book to book, but I think just as much time as you can spend in the character's head.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, Mae. I was thinking, because I'm new to fiction, I would write something and it would seem like that's the way it was. That's now reality. But I can't change it because that's the way it was. My editor, for instance, would say, well, why don't you have the two main characters go to the same school? You have them in separate schools now. If they went to the same school, it would make more sense and drive the story. And I was thinking, well, I can't do that because they go to separate schools. And then, wait a minute, I'm making this up. I can have it any way I want. So it takes a while to get used to.
Yeah.
To invent whatever you want. You have pretty much free reign.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about writing is that you get to make it up, and it's your personal project, and you can change whatever you want. Yeah, so that's a really great thing about writing. So Carlos, again, the main character, is disabled and in a wheelchair. So Scott, I'm curious if you knew anyone that was disabled now, earlier, and also, did you do any research on the rules of wheelchair basketball and how it's played, or did you like kind of know before you started writing or while you were writing?
Yeah, in terms of do I know anyone's disabled? Not really. Although there's a guy, a friend of mine named Richie Bennett, who has cerebral palsy, so he can walk somewhat. He gets around on a walker. So there's all kinds of levels of disability. His is reasonably mild, but I got to know him when he was probably 10 or 12 because his brother played on a baseball team with my son, and good kid, and we really hit it off. We became pals, and later on, he introduced me basically to this wheelchair basketball team that he was then coaching, and so he introduced me to basically to that world, which was a lot of it was pretty new to me. Of course, in the past I've known people who are in wheelchairs and things, but just being around these kids was really interesting. And what I did is I basically stole their stories. I ripped these kids off, and what I hope is not a bad way. But I sat down and talked with several of them, and I said, basically, tell me your story. Tell me your life story. You know, everything. How you came to be in a wheelchair, what your disability is, how it affects you, what you like about sports, all the stuff. And these kids told me these amazing stories. And so, I had some basic characters, but I used a lot of what these kids told me about their lives and their stories and their adventures and their difficulties and challenges in the book. So I kind of really ripped them off, and I appreciate them helping me out. But it was, yeah, and that's another reason why it was great that I did about a wheelchair basketball team, is because it made it so different and took it out of the ordinary. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun doing it. It was great dealing with these kids. It was, really so much more fun than it would have been if I just did about it. My kids' basketball team, the regular able-bodied basketball team.
Yeah, and writing is just finding what you want to write about and finding the things that will give you ideas. And it's so fun to just get, like Mae said, a shiny new idea. It's just so exciting. Like, ooh, shiny new idea, fun. Okay, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. The second part of your question, Quinn, lay that on me again.
Huh?
What was the second part of your question? I forgot.
Oh, no, that was my question.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I'm going on to the next question. I couldn't help but notice that there was a quote on the cover of your book right here. It's kind of hard to see a little bit, but from the famous author Mike Lupica. And I'm such a huge sports fan, as I've mentioned before, and a big basketball fan too. And I've read a number of his books, including, I think one of them was called The Big Field, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm wondering if you drew any inspiration from him while writing the book or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, first, I remember the last question that I skipped over. But first of all, about research, did I do a lot of research in terms of wheelchair basketball? And I did some. I read up on it, and I talked to the kids, and I learned kind of about the rules. I didn't want to get super, super deep in the super technicalities, because I didn't want it to be just about the technical stuff and just about wheelchair basketball. I wanted it to be about the kids. In fact, one of the kids I was talking to, and I was asking him, I said, what bothers you about the way, is there anything that bothers you about the way people treat you when you're out in public and so forth, being disabled? And he said, there's one thing. He said, we'll be in airports or something. We'll be traveling to a game, and we'll be in an airport, and people will come up and they'll say, oh, what do you guys do? And he says, well, we're a wheelchair basketball team. And he said, the people always wind up saying, oh, you're such an inspiration. And he said, we don't want to be an inspiration. We just want to be basketball. We just want to be kids playing basketball. They don't want all the violins and all the sympathy and all that stuff. They just want to be kids playing basketball. So that's kind of was one of my guiding things as I went through the writing process. But okay, now about Mike Lupica. He's a famous sports writer. He's roughly my age, so he's an old guy, and we go way back to back in the '80s and stuff, covering basketball and together. We both cover the same World Series or the NBA finals and stuff like that, and it's kind of a fraternity. You get to know the other sports writers from other towns. And Mike is from New York, so I knew him, and I watched as he began his young adult fiction writing career, and he did really well. As you said, he's done a ton of books, and so when I decided so he kind of set the path. He kind of planted the seeds, like, oh yeah, this is a way I could go. This is something I could do. For one thing, we're always looking for side projects and ways to make money and stuff. And so that he was doing that, and I thought, okay, this would be interesting. Let me give it a try. So Mike was an inspiration. Plus, he's really a super writer. He's a great sports writer, just a very interesting guy. So yeah, he kind of inspired me without I never talked to him about it, that specific thing, but by what he did, he kind of planted the seeds for me.
Wow, I love Mike Lupica, and that's awesome that you've known him and known him for so long. Yeah. That's great. And I'm honestly inspired by so many sports writers because partly and mostly because I aspire to be somewhere in the sports kind of universe, whether it's a writer or an announcer, or like a writer, announcer, analyst, one of those three, not limited to that, but somewhere in the sports world because I love it so much. And do you have any kind of tips on how to get started? I know there's not much for me to do, one in quarantine, and two at such a young age. But is there anything that I can do to kind of jumpstart and anything?
Yeah, it's kind of tough now. It used to be much easier because you had basically newspapers, for instance, and that was it. So if you want to be a newspaper writer like I did, you got a job in a newspaper and worked your way up. Now there are so many different outlets. There are bloggers. There's all kinds of websites. Used to be just a few main newspapers. Now there's 100 sports websites. There's so many different ways to go. So you have to be one thing. You have to be very creative and plugged in. You got to pay attention to what's going on. Read as much as you can. Be aware of what the different websites and newspapers and so forth are, and also as much as you can in your position, make contacts, reach out to people, say, hey, this is interesting what you did. How could I someday get a job doing this? So don't be afraid to reach out and ask people questions. But it's kind of a brave new world, and I'm not sure. I think it would scare me if I was in your place right now, looking ahead to finding a job, and oh my God, there's so many possibilities. So you just have to put the antennas up and pay attention.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. That's really a valuable piece of information and advice going forward. So I really appreciate that. So I have a final question for both of you. We have learned what winning really means to the characters in both of your novels. So I'm wondering, what does winning really mean to each of you personally, and why is its true meaning especially important today? That might be a lot to unpack, so I can repeat that at any time. But Mae, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I can start off. And that's a great question. And it's so interesting. I think winning is probably somewhat embedded in our DNA. I mean, if you look at humans and the act of survival, there's a piece of winning to that, right? So we all have this, I think, need to win at what we're doing and how we're going about in our lives. But for me, I think winning and losing both bring the same thing. You can win and not be number one. And to me, that means that if you're winning or losing, you are challenging yourself and you're growing and you're learning about how to improve and all these wonderful things that helps you on your journey. And so, I think with my book, Kaia, that's something that she and her friends definitely learn. And with these strange times, we want to just keep growing, like all these things happening in our world and that we're hearing and seeing, or maybe challenges that we're experiencing on a personal level. As much as you can use that to challenge yourself and to grow from that, that's what winning is to me. And I write a lot about kids on their emotional journeys in these books, and that's a part of it too, is learning how to grow from your wins and your losses.
Yeah, and my uncle, who is a very important person to me, he told me once, there is no losers. And I thought to myself, interesting point, but you're wrong. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? And then he explained it to me. And he said something that actually really has stuck with me. And he said that there's no losers, there are winners, and there are learners. So either you win and you have a great time, or you learn from that experience. Like losing a baseball game. If you strike out on a pitch down and away, you know, oh, don't swing at that pitch anymore. Or if you watch a pitch go by and strike three, you just remember to be more aggressive. And so that really stuck with me, and that was really interesting to me that he said that. So Scott, I can repeat the question again. So we have learned what winning really means to the characters in your book, and so I'm curious, what does winning mean to you personally, and why is its true meaning especially important today?
Well, that's a good question, Quinn. I think, to me, winning isn't just like a big shining moment with a gigantic trophy at the end of everything. You work and go through all the stuff, and all of a sudden you win or you lose. It's nice, and some people get that. Some people become Olympic champions or NBA champions, but most of us don't get to that point. And so if, for instance, I wanted to be an Olympic gold medal swimmer, and I worked my whole life to do that, and I didn't make it to the Olympics, or I didn't win a gold medal or something, would that mean my life was a failure? It would be kind of tragic if I felt that way. So I think winning is not only winning the big, huge prize at the end, but you win battles and moments along the way, and there, victories along the way. And if you can't learn to appreciate and acknowledge those victories along the way, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to always be disappointed. You're always going to be striving for something that might be impossible. So it's not that you shouldn't strive for things like that, but you should accept and give yourself credit for wins and victories along as you go along the way. And I just think that another thing, because I was recently reading an interesting book that a friend of mine wrote about team chemistry. Does team chemistry, the guys or the women or whatever, getting along on a team, does that make any difference? And one of the points in her book was that a team working together is in essence a victory. If you're say a basketball team, and you get to the point where you're all working together and helping each other and pushing each other, and in some ways criticizing each other in a nice way, and being supportive and all that stuff, you learn, and that's a win. If you can get to the point where you are that kind of team player, sort of like Carlos did in my book, that's a form of winning, is learning how to work with other people, which I think kind of applies to what a lot of the stuff we're going through now. With the demonstrations and so forth, is we're all kind of learning to we're on a team here. We got to start figuring out how to work together on this, right?
Yeah, and yeah, that's a really great point. So wow, this has been an absolutely amazing discussion. I've learned so much, and I am inspired to look at winning in a different way, and more of a different way. So thank you both so much for letting me ask you all these questions, and I hope you all have a great summer. Thank you.
Thanks, Quinn. Oh, and Quinn, by the way, thanks very much. The questions are great. You really moved the thing along. Thank you very much for the great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you both. This was fun and inspiring, and I loved talking to both of you. And thanks, Quinn. I wish I could see you in person, but maybe at a future Bay Area Book Festival.